buying the houses under conditions. We have lots of dilemma and lots of question marks around buying houses from commercial banks. Is it permissible or not permissible? And the scholars, we have alhamdulillah, we have Majlis al-Ifta al-Europi, which is the European Council of Fatwa and Research. They have really well-sounded scholars around the world, and they are led by Dr. Yusuf al-Qaradawi, and now after him is Dr. Ali Qoradaghi, which I'm taking, by the way, most of the material from Dr. Ali Qoradaghi. They issued a fatwa to allow buying houses from the commercial banks under conditions. So they put 4 conditions for that. Condition number 1, that you are buying that for an accommodation. You are not buying it for trading. And as you all know, the people say it's the first house, isn't it? We hear a lot the Muslims say, oh, it's allowed for the first house. Well, if it's for the accommodation, condition number 1 is met. Second, for the normal accommodation, not a luxurious house. You have a house for 300,000. You have a house for 600,000. Both can actually meet your requirements, because both are houses. But you went for the 6,000 house. You broke the requirements or the conditions. So you need to go with the minimum price of a house that can meet, because they issued that fatwa based on the needs of the people. Not an open fatwa. It's based on the needs. And so based on the needs does not mean that you are going to buy a fancy house for $1 million using the commercial bank. But you can buy a house that will cover you and your family. That's condition number 2. Condition number 3, you have no liquid money. Or sometimes you might have assets back in your country. So if you have assets back in your country, or other types of assets, like you have a farm and you want to buy a house, you cannot, because you have an asset that can cover that. Again, it's based on the need, not based on, oh, it's my first house. Okay, you bought with your money a farm, but now you want to buy a house for accommodation. Then you can sell the farm in order to buy. It's not about the house itself, but it's about the need again. These conditions were put for the need. And number 4, there is no Islamic bank. And it is arguable whether the Islamic finances that we have in Australia are Islamic finances or not. We are going to discuss that in details, inshallah. So the fatwa is only if the countries are with Muslim minorities. But if the Muslims are majorities, that fatwa does not apply. The reason why? Because when they are a majority, they can make change. They can make rules. So they do not have the right to take that fatwa. So with that, can someone in Adelaide or in Australia buy a house from a commercial bank if he feels that he meets the four requirements? Then he can take that fatwa. If he can meet the 4 conditions, he can actually take that fatwa and buy from the commercial bank.
You mentioned the asset. What if the asset is the only source of income? So if they have a farm, but the family earns from the farm, would that still mean to sell it?
This is the only source of income. then this needs a specific fatwa for that person. So that person needs to sit down, explain all the ins and outs, and say the conditions, and based on that he will be given a fatwa to yes or no to buy, and take that fatwa to buy from the commercial bank. Now comes to the...
I have a question there.
Yes.
How about in terms of the aspect, if you have like a house back home, which like you haven't declared to the government yet, and if you're going to sell that house, you need to prove where you get the money from to bring it back to Australia if you're going to use that money to buy a house here. So
This is again a specific fatwa for an individual case. So there are lots of questions that need to look. These are things that are very complicated. So even when I get some questions like these, I get them, I ask all the questions, and then I go back to the specialists. I speak to them, I say, here is the condition. They sometimes come back to me and say, ask this and this and this. And then they can issue the fatwa for that individual. But it's not straightforward. It's not for someone like me or an imam or anyone to give the fatwa about these complicated transactions. I refer, for example, for these to specific people who are scholars in finances, Islamic finances. So they have degrees and professors in Sharia, and especially in fiqh, and not all fiqh, but the fiqh of the financial transactions. This is where I refer always when questions come like this. Now comes to the Islamic finances, which are, we have a couple of Islamic finance companies in Australia that are providing housing, for example. What are the bases that they are using, and can we use them or not? The basis, or what these Islamic finances do, it will depend on the license that they are carrying. So the Australian ASIC controls what a company can do and what a company cannot do, based on the license that they are having. So if that company has a license that allows them to do such things, they will do. So you have the company, and this is what happens when a person wants to go and buy a house from these Islamic finances in Australia. You have the company. That company actually allow for investments, first type of company, investors to put money. Some of the Islamic finances in Australia, they are from this type. So they collect money from the investors. Okay? Another type of company is that they have the investors who have money, and there is someone who wants to buy a house. So that Islamic company come and do transaction with that person and say to them, we are selling you. He will say, I want to buy that house. They will come and say, okay, we will sell you that house. But they don't have the money. What they do is, they liaise with the investors. And they come and they bring that money to here. And so they have a transaction between him, the company, and the person. Murabaha, transaction of ijara, any of these Islamic names. And they say that to the person, this is non-binding. This transaction that between us, you cannot take it to the court because it doesn't worth anything. And they will create a contract between the investors and the person, which is you have to pay this amount, dollars, per month. If you are late, this percentage fees, and so on. And the yearly interest vary per year. So they will say to the person, every year we have to revisit the percentage that we will put on you. I'm speaking here about the Islamic finance that we have in Australia. And so, actually, what our Islamic finances are doing, they are just advising. They are not taking the investments. Because if you look at it, investments, it's hard to get money to cover the demand of buying houses by the Muslims. So that drove people to go to investors from outside the Muslim community. And so you have people taking money, investments from banks, from non-Muslim financial companies or investors, and from Muslim investors, which is few. The majority of the Muslims want to buy houses, they don't want to invest their money. That's why it made it hard on the Islamic finance companies to actually find investors. So as you can see, the transaction for anyone to buy a house, what will happen is the person will go to this company. This company is a mediator between the investors and the person. This company will create a transaction or a contract, Islamic contract, that is non-binding, has no value. And then the person will sign on a contract between him and the investors about the money that he will be given. That person will be given a paper to go, he will be given the money to go to buy the house. So pretty much like the commercial banks. Pretty much there is no difference. I'm speaking to you about the details of the transaction, what happens in the Islamic finances. I actually sat down and in this room, one of the big Islamic finance companies gave a presentation. I called him from one of the states. He gave me a presentation about the transaction and the details of the transaction. And I asked him a couple of questions and confirmed with him that it's actually not an Islamic transaction. But there is a fatwa. So all of these companies, they have fatwas from muftis here in Australia, muftis from outside, that this is a halal transaction. Okay? Does that make these transactions haram or halal? Well, there is a fatwa. I am not maybe in the knowledge level of those who gave the fatwa, so it will be left to the person himself to decide if he is comfortable to follow that fatwa, then he has a justification. If he is comfortable to go with the fatwa of buying from the commercial bank, then he has that justification. If he is not comfortable, he is not happy, then he needs to stay away. Okay? So this is actually what's happening with buying houses from banks versus buying houses from our Islamic financial companies versus buying houses by your own. Okay? Yes?
For the first case that you mentioned about there are some companies that takes money from the investors, so they're actually not acting like middlemen, right? Is it the same arrangement that they have, that they would provide, like pay certain money a month? You have this late fees.
The problem with this, no, there's no one who does not put late fees, who does not put, they call it changeable interest rate.
Variable, yeah.
Yeah, per year. There is none, except they are forced to do that. Until now, as far as I know, none of our Islamic finances actually take funds, buy, and sell directly from their own. Do you understand? Because there are two things here. For someone in Australia to receive investments, he need to have a license to manage funds. Okay? So that is coming to him, money coming to the company. And then for someone to actually sell houses, he needs to have another license, which is a property investment license. And then if he wants to sell these to the public outside, he needs to have another license to sell to the public. That complicated things in Australia. And there are lots of regulations about it. That's why it is almost non-existing in Australia. I can claim that no one is doing it. And I can claim that the majority of them are just advising rather than managing the funds and buying properties and selling properties. Okay?
So with the arrangement of like paying $1 per month and late fees, I understand that. I mean it's a reasonable arrangement, but the yearly interest for is it looks riba to me because of the
Yeah, it's not
but
fixed.
is it because of the variable arrangement, or what if you have like some commercial banks actually would have like they would set a fixed interest? Does that make it if it's a fixed interest?
As far as what I contacted the financial companies in Australia, it's variable.
But what if an Islamic finance would say that it's a fixed interest? Would that make it?
So that's one aspect of it, which is the fixed rate, because that is regulated by ASIC, which is the government body that dictates the rules and the transactions. So if the ASIC, based on the license of that Islamic finance company, the license does not support, then what happens is ASIC will dictate that you have to make in the contract. ASIC need to approve these contracts. So you want to say, I want to sell people houses and this is my contract. ASIC will say, no, you have to put variable interest. They will dictate. But if you have your license in a way that this is mine and I am going to sell directly to the customer, going to receive money from investors, develop, sell directly to the customer, it's going to be heavily regulated, but you can. But none has done it yet. Okay? That's number one. What else? Do you have any other questions in this?
There's another, someone told me about this, with the commercial bank. So this guy, he bought a house for like $800,000. He had $800,000. He put that $800,000 in the account. It has a special name. It's your money, but you put it for the bank, and you don't take anything out. So
And you will
the
be
interest
given,
is, yeah, interest is 0,
yeah.
but you are paying the loan amount you have taken from the bank for 800,000. But you can take that 800,000 from that account anytime. But if you take out the amount, the interest will be calculated. So you have,
So it's actually interest,
yeah,
but he's not taking interest and he's not paying interest. So they are
Yeah.
calculating it that you are putting the money. So why is he, if he has the money, why is he putting the money in the bank from the first place?
I don't know. I mean, this is another
Why?
type of transaction which is, I don't know if it's correct or not.
So it's not correct, of course. Why? Because he has taken 800 and gave 800.
Yeah.
So he is paying this, correct?
Offset account.
Okay. So because he is putting the 800 in the account, the bank says to him, I'm not going to charge interest. The loan that you have taken, you just pay that loan without interest. So you pay the 800,000, 800,000. But you need to keep the 800,000 with us as long as you are paying. Until you finish, then you can take it. So what he's claiming is, look, I paid the house, I did not pay 1 cent interest, and here you go. This is what he's claiming, correct?
Yeah.
Okay, the contract that he signed states that I agree, if I pull that money from my account, I will pay interest. So we went back to square one. It's exactly like the interest-free buying from cars or any of these. Because you will have in that contract, if I don't pay within that period of time, I agree to pay interest, this amount, this percentage for this land, so on. So you are signing an interest contract. All right? Although some people will say, oh, he did not pay interest. So you look at it as it is. But you look at the contracts and the terms that you agreed on. You agreed to pay interest.